they decided to fly over the area and to take photographs to make new maps of the area. And there was a man who took a photograph, and the captain who looked at that photograph, his name was Durupanar. When he saw the photograph and he saw this massive ship-shaped object, he said, "Whoa, what is that?" And when the earthquake took place, it shook all the mud off the top of this formation. And for the first time, probably in 1,000 years, the top of this ship appeared. And it was very obvious it was a ship.
This episode is brought to you by merkmerch.com. That's merkmerch.com for all your Merkle Media swag. Also, go ahead and check out merklefilms.com for all your on-demand streaming needs of all our documentaries right there at merklefilms.com. Now, today we have Rick Renner coming on the show, and Rick is a fascinating man who believes he and his team have found the location, the landing spot of Noah's Ark, and they have found the remnants. This is a fantastic conversation, and yes, we get into Nephilim and monsters as well. Let's get to Rick right now. All right, today we have Sir Rick Renner on the show. How are you, sir?
I'm doing good, and I'm glad to be with you.
I'm glad you're here. So this is a delight for me, to be honest with you. I'm very excited about having you on the show. You were somebody who came across the desk a little while ago, and then I was delighted to find out that we have mutual friends. And I'll tell a quick story. I was speaking at an Armed Media Conference with Pastor Alan DiDio, and Joseph Z was there. And I had seen Joseph Z online. I'd never met him. And we got acquainted. And the second day of the conference, I go to walk out of the main room to go back to the green room to get some water. And Joseph is walking in. And I say hi to him. I shake his hand. And he is just over the top excited to talk to me. And he said, "Man, I've been going through your YouTube channel. Great stuff. I sent it to Rick Renner. He's checking it out." And I was just like, whoa, like I didn't expect that, but it was awesome to hear. And, so here we are a few months later, and you're here on the show with us. So thank you very much.
Well, I'm glad to be with you. Have you ever had Alan DiDio on the show?
Oh, a couple times. Yes.
His book, Summoning the Demon, is amazing.
Yes. I actually had him on, I would say sometime this year, talking about the book. So he actually was driving back from Nashville. So he actually swung through the studio, and we sat down at the table and had a good conversation. So yeah.
Well, I'm honored to be on your show. I've been skimming your program, and it's pretty amazing. It's called the Confessionals, so I feel like I need to confess something.
Oh, I know. I could go into talking about how that came up. It was a truck driver idea. I was driving down the highway, and it just kind of came to me. And sometimes I regret it because people looking at the title don't always know exactly what the show's about. And so, but anyways, I'm glad you're here. And if you could, for the audience, because we were talking beforehand, and we have a very diverse audience. So guaranteed you're getting exposed to a new audience today. So if you could introduce people to who you are. I know you're in Moscow, but I feel like it'd be better if you told people who you are than myself.
Well, I'm a Bible teacher, and I've lived in Russia for 34 years. And this is my studio in Moscow. We're very, very connected to the Russian government. We love Russia. We love the Russian-speaking people. We own 2 networks that broadcast to the entire Russian-speaking world, and I'm a writer. I've written 58 books, and I have my own TV program, which is broadcast all over the United States and all over the world, and that's who I am. And you were asking me earlier about my book, about fallen angels, giants, monsters in the world before the flood. And Tony, people have kind of seen me as a centrist on what I teach and what I write. So when I decided to write this book, for me, it was really going out on a limb. I mean, this was really getting out there for me. And I was a little bit afraid to do it because a lot of people who talk about Noah's Ark and the Nephilim, they get into a lot of bizarre stuff. Yeah. And I didn't know if I really wanted to be affiliated with that. But as I really began to study about Noah's Ark and the events that were occurring before the flood and the Nephilim, I really felt like it was such an important subject that it needed to come center. We need to see what the Bible really teaches, what really happened in past history. And of course, the ruins of Noah's Ark really are laying in the lower mountains of Ararat. I've been there and I have seen it. Tony, I wish I could just pick you up and take you there. You would be amazed. I just got new photos today of brand new photography from every different angle of the Ark. It is just amazing.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I want to talk about Noah's Ark today because this is a site that I've been aware of for many years. And it was one of those sites that, with Ron Wyatt being, I would say, probably the leading archaeologist on the site and being labeled as an amateur archaeologist, it brought a lot of scrutiny his way over the years. And it's unfortunate in the sense that he's no longer with us. And a lot of his work, I feel like, is starting to come around full circle, and we're able to actually see what he was talking about. And I feel like the I don't know, the societal consciousness of what we're living in right now is much more ready to accept and look at the evidence he's brought forward. And that's kind of like what you're doing with just the first chapter of this book. You laid out so much information as to why this is actually the site of Noah's Ark. And this is not something that anybody who's listening who has no idea what we're talking about, Rick's going to go into it. But I want to preface with saying that this is not a site where it's theoretical and, you go there and they say, oh, we think it landed here once upon a time, but, because we have these writings. This is something that you go to a site and you literally are looking at an ancient petrified ship. And it's hard to get around the fact that this is a ship on a mountain. And so if you could, let's start from the beginning and migrate into this where, what was the first time you became aware of this site and when did you start taking it serious?
Probably 20 years ago, I saw a video that was made by Ron Wyatt. And I didn't take it serious because he was an amateur archaeologist and wasn't trained in archaeology. So I didn't take it serious, Tony. But the more I began to dig into it, it's just like a hook got set in my heart that I had to more deeply study this subject. So Ron Wyatt died, but I made contact with the guy who really picked up his work. His name is Andrew Jones, and Andrew Jones has lived in eastern Turkey for more than 2 decades and has really dedicated his life to this site, which is called the Drupanar site. But let me tell you how it first showed up. So Noah's Ark was visited for thousands of years. In fact, in my book, there's a whole chapter called What Ancient Voices Wrote About the Ark. I mean, there's reams of information. They said it was located just below the Silk Road. Well, guess what? Where the Ark is located, just the top of the ridge above it is the Silk Road. So when people would travel the Silk Road, they would take a little detour, go down to the Ark and take pieces of it and make amulets. All that's recorded in history. But then it disappeared. And the reason it disappeared is because that entire side of the mountain is a mudslide. It is mud from the Ark. And in fact, when you go there, you got to be ready to ruin your shoes because you're going to ruin your shoes when you go to this site. It is just loaded with flood mud to this day. And so the mud covered the top of the Ark. Then in 1948, in the month of May, and that's really important, there was an earthquake. And when the earthquake took place, it shook all the mud off the top of this formation. And for the first time, probably in 1,000 years, the top of this ship appeared. And it was very obvious it was a ship. And the local Kurdish village, which has been there for thousands of years, they were the first to see it. But the reason that date is important is because May 1948 is also the month that Israel was reestablished as a nation. So like these two prophetic events took place at one time. Israel's reestablished in May 48. Noah's Ark reappears in 1948. These are really prophetic signs which Jesus gave us in Matthew chapter 24 as signs of the end of the age. So about 1958, I believe, they decided to fly over the area and to take photographs to make new maps of the area. So they were taking aerial photography, and there was a man who took a photograph, and the captain who looked at that photograph, his name was Drupanar. When he saw the photograph and he saw this massive ship-shaped object, he said, "Whoa, what is that?" Well, the Kurds knew it was there, but now the army is seeing it. And there was no doubt it was the shape of a ship, in the lower mountains of Ararat. And that also was an enigma because people have been looking for it on Mount Ararat. But the Bible never says it landed on Mount Ararat. And if it had landed on Mount Ararat, it would have been blown to bits because that is a stratovolcano. It would have never survived there. But the Bible says it came to rest in the mountains of Ararat, which is a huge, huge mountain range. And this is one of the mountains of Ararat. So de Rupenaar took his photograph and he sent it to Brandenburger, who was a professor at Ohio State University. And he is such a specialist with aerial photography. He was the man who identified the missile sites in the Cuban Missile Crisis. So this was number one man in the world on aerial photography. And when he saw it, he said, I have no doubt in my mind at all, that is a ship in the mountains of Ararat. And that's what began all the research with Ron Wyatt. A photograph of it was published in Life magazine. Ron Wyatt saw it, and he went to the lower mountains of Ararat to see it with his own eyes and was convinced that it really was the ruins of Noah's Ark. So now let's go forward years and years and years. So I contact the man who's now is the number one Ark researcher in the world. And I said, hey, do you really believe this is Noah's Ark? He said, well, it is definitely the ruins of a ship. I don't know another ship 300 cubits long that is in the mountains of Ararat. Do you know another ship that size besides Noah's Ark?
Negative.
And I said, well, how about if I come and I bring my whole family, my whole film crew? So I came. It's not far from Moscow. And we camped out there, and I've spent about 2 months there if you add all the days together. I have walked all over that site. I have measured that site. And Tony, I'm telling you, it really is the ruins of Noah's Ark. You can see the bow of the ship. You can see the stern of the ship. And when you stand at the bottom and look up the hill toward the bow of the ship, it is absolutely overwhelming to see the massive, massive size of this ship. It's 515 feet long. It is massive. And, no one knew that ancient men could build anything that big, but God gave to Noah the technology to do it. And that's why Noah was able to do it. But that's how all of this began.
Hey guys, if you want to be on the show and share your story with me, go ahead and shoot me an email at contact@theconfessionalspodcast.com. And if you want more shows on a weekly basis, just hit the join button on YouTube and become a member, and you get access to a bunch of extra content. Every Thursday, we come out with a new members episode. Well, I think that it's all fascinating. There are things with this site that even off the ship location that I find fascinating. With the actual site of the ship, there is something that I wanted to ask you, and I'm sure you've covered it or looked at it. In the middle of the ship, there seems to be a big boulder or a big rock, and I imagine there's probably detractors that people who are looking for reasons to say this is not a ship would say, how does a giant rock get into the ship at that point? Have you come across this issue at all?
It's a very big issue. And many people say, well, this is just a natural geological formation. That's why that rock is there. However, that argument is now finished because they've done all kinds of underground scans, ERT scans, ground penetrating radar, and they now know that that rock is not connected to this object. It has rolled into this object. And in fact, the new scans, I wish I had them to show you right now. It shows the complete hull of a ship. You can see it. It is a ship. And that big rock just rolled into that object. Now, some people say maybe it came down the hill with the object or rolled into the object. And that's why one side of it is a little bit destroyed. It's because this big rock somehow rolled into it. But that's what the rock is about. But because of the ground penetrating radar and the ERT scans, they now, without ever using a shovel, can see what is inside that object. There are rooms, there are compartments, there are 3 decks, just like we read in Genesis chapter 6. We know there was a central atrium, and the very newest analysis, which is just a few months old, from the number one expert in the world who views these kinds of graphs, says that there is a central corridor right from the bow of the ship to the center of the ship that is still vacant. And if they could get to it, it is vacant enough that you could probably walk upright through that one part of the ship to this very day. But it is not a natural geological formation. Those kinds of angles and right angles and compartments They don't show up in nature. And Tony, not only that, when you walk the side of the ship, particularly as you go from the bottom to the top on the right side, you can see the beams of the ship, the ribs of the ship. They're parallel, they are symmetrical. That does not happen in nature, but you can see it. It's about every 9 feet, there's another rib, and they are massive. And because they have drilled into those ribs, they know exactly how big they are. They're about 2 feet wide. You know, you'd have to have some pretty big ribs of the ship for a ship that size made out of wood.
Yeah.
And it's all verified now. It's really verified. Now, people don't want to give up the idea that it's on the peak of Mount Ararat, because people have invested a lot of money searching for it there. And there have been a lot of fraudulent claims about something they found on the top of Mount Ararat. But here's the problem. The people who say that they've seen something on the top of Mount Ararat have never been able to return to the same location. They have never been able to verify what they saw. And that's because it's not there. It's fraudulent. It's laying on the lower mountain, a mountain called Mount Judy. And the word Judy means Doomsday Mountain. Isn't that amazing? And if you go to the top of that mountain, you can go to the place where the Ark first landed. There's a huge dip in the ground. That's where the Ark first landed. And the top of that mountain from ancient times is called the place of the landing. And over 4,000 years, because it's a mudslide, the Ark came down the side of the hill and finally came to rest in its current location. And every spring, when the rains happen and the snow melts, all the mud begins to move. But that one object just sits right there. And it seems like that big rock that rolled into it is what's holding it there in that single position. Its shape only becomes more pronounced year after year after year. Everything else around it moves, and the Ark just becomes more sticking out clearer and clearer all the time. I think it's amazing.
It's absolutely amazing. And I remember seeing pictures, and I'm not sure if this picture was in your book or not. Again, your book is Fallen Angels, Giants, Monsters, and the World Before the Flood. First of all, I love the fact that you wrote a book and then provided pictures, because with this kind of stuff, it doesn't leave to imagination. Then you're not left trying to describe the picture. You're showing people, this is what I'm talking about. And in some pictures, it does show, whether it was in your book or not, I don't remember, but I remember seeing one picture where it was split down the middle of dating 1961, I believe. And then on the right side was the ship of 2019. And it shows how even what they saw in 1961 as a ship formation has since been revealed even more, because of how everything has kind of flowed around it, but it hasn't changed. It hasn't moved with everything else.
There's something else too, if I can just tell you.
Sure.
In the valley below are what are called drogestones. Did you see that in the book?
Yes, you read my mind.
Okay, drogestones look like giant anchors. These are so big, they're the size of a car. Well, a drogestone was used to balance ships in bad weather, and they found them in the Mediterranean, they found them on the Nile. They were used all over in ancient ships in the ancient world. Well, the Ark would have had these balancing stones bigger than any drogestones in history. And Tony, they have found 26 of them. 26. And if you follow them, you come to understand that as the Ark began to slow and the water began to go down, Noah and his boys began to cut those stones. And if you follow them like breadcrumbs, they lead you all the way to where the Ark is right now. You can follow those stones and you can see how they sailed right up to that current location. And one other thing is the Epic of Gilgamesh. Maybe you've heard of the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Yep.
Gilgamesh was a real ancient king. And Gilgamesh said in his epic that he went to see the builder of the Ark. And he described the location. He said there was a saddle-backed mountain. He called it the place of the rising of the sun. And he said just below those mountain peaks was the first settlement where the builder of the Ark settled with his family. Well, guess what? If you go to this Darupanar site, right above it is a saddle-backed mountain, just like described in the Epic of Gilgamesh. And just below it is the first settlement, which is described in Genesis chapter 10, verse 4. It's called Mesha. It's in the Bible, and it's right there. So it's likely that Noah and his sons took some of the pieces, the elements of the Ark, to help construct the first houses where they lived and where people lived after the flood, and the ruins of it really are there. And in those same cliffs above the flood are petroglyphs. Are you ready for this? In those petroglyphs are giraffes, rhinoceros, lions, elephants, things that are not native to Turkey. But those people saw those things, and that's because they had a memory of what came off the ark.
Mm. It's wild. And it's wild that you just brought that up too, because I was going to go into the drogestones. And just for people to understand, like the drogestones, they would hang down underneath the ship. And when these wild, I mean, you're talking about a massive flood pushing against this ship, without the drogestones, it flips over. So these drogestones really provided that balance.
They provided balance, stability for the ship. Yeah, you had to have it.
And didn't you say that like these drogestones, I mean, they're massive, right? They're not just like a couple 100 pounds, they're tons, right?
They're tons. They're tons. And there's a hole cut right in the top, and that's where the rope was thread, and it hung from the sides of the ship. And a lot of them now have been broken up, and they've been used as tombstones in an ancient cemetery in that part of the world. But they're the remnants of all the drogestones, and several of them are still intact. But
Wow.
even the ones that like are massive, you're only looking at half of them because it's broken. So these were just massive, massive stones. And there's one more thing that's in the book, and this is my favorite thing, Tony. On the very top of the mountain, near the place of the landing. And by the way, this is right on the border of Iran. In fact, when we went there with our cameras, if we pointed our cameras to the top of the hill, the guys with the machine guns pointed their guns at us to let us know we need to turn the cameras around. That's how close it is to the border, just a couple 100 meters to the border of Iran. Well, near the place of the landing, this huge dip where the ship first landed, the local Kurds knew for thousands of years that right near there was a massive altar. It is the altar that Noah used. And when you go to that altar, it is not hard to imagine all the events described in Genesis chapter 9. There is a groove that is cut right across the top of the altar. I don't know if you saw it in the book or not.
I did.
But you can see that it was made with a human chisel or some kind of human instrumentation. And that is where Noah offered up his first sacrifice to God. You can just see the blood flowing right through that groove, right off the side of that big rock, the rainbow appearing, and God giving the first law, which was really bizarre. What a strange law. You may not drink blood. Why in the world would that be the first law after they came off the ark? And the answer is the Nephilim.
Yes.
The Nephilim were cannibals. They ate people. They drank blood. They were cannibals. And so when God gave that as the first rule, it was the equivalent of saying, okay, no, now we've cleaned up this thing. Let's never go back and do what we just took care of. Don't ever go back to these days of cannibalism. But the Nephilim were really in the world in the days before the flood.
Yeah, absolutely were. And I want to hit on that, but I want to stress to people that we're talking about the mountains of Ararat, a ship in the mountains, drogestones in the mountains, finding an altar that fits the description in the Bible. You also found foundation of an ancient building that I think you suggested that it could be Noah's home or something. Is that right? Do I remember that correctly?
It's in the valley below, and it was attributed by the Byzantines as the place where Noah lived with his family. So all the events that you read about in Genesis chapter 9 would have taken place right there. When Ham did something to his father, whatever it was, it all happened right there. And because they believed that was the place where it took place, they believed it was Noah's house, they built an ancient Byzantine church on top of the ruins of what they said was Noah's house. I don't know if it was, but why not? It could have been.
Yeah.
And certainly the Byzantines were a lot closer to it than we are.
Yeah.
And so they would have had access to records and information, and the ruins of it are still there. It's very unfortunate that the local people have little by little been disassembling that ancient Byzantine church, using the stone to build fences for their cattle.
Unreal.
I said, stop it. Don't do that. Stop this.
Slap him on the hands.
But I went there with Joseph Z.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. It's an amazing site. I mean, I fantasize about visiting it myself. I mean, it's absolutely amazing. And you mentioned about how Noah using pieces of the ark to build. I find it interesting you brought that up because that's actually one of the arguments people, excuse me, arguments that people use that it couldn't be the ship because they suggest that the ship wouldn't even exist now because they would have used the wood to build things because after the flood. But you say, of course they did that, but there was so much wood that there's basically a shell of what the ship would have been. Is that right?
That's correct. In fact, in my book, I have an artist's illustration of probably how they use certain parts of the book to build, of the boat to build, particularly the roofs of their homes. But the homes would have primarily been constructed out of stone. They would have used some of the wood and the pitch to cover the tops for a roof. But I mean, honestly, Tony, this object is so massive. It is
Yeah.
massive. You have to really be there. And when you come to the bottom of it and look up and you see the stern of the ship, I mean, your mouth just drops open because it is so enormous. But can I say something about the Nephilim?
Sure. Let's go.
You know, Nephilim were real, and they were in the world before the flood and after the flood. The Bible tells us that in Genesis chapter 6, verse 4. And we know from Genesis chapter 6, verse 2, as you well know, you've covered it many times, it says the sons of God, and that was an old expression to describe angels, saw the daughters of men that they were fair and took them wives. But a better translation would be took women to mate with. They really didn't marry them, they just took them. And isn't that language interesting? Took. It almost carries the idea of an abduction. So suddenly these heavenly creatures come down out of the heavens, and when people saw them, they were enamored. They were stunned, these amazing celestial creatures that came into the world. And we know from the book of Enoch, which is not a book of the Bible, but it is a very serious commentary on pre-flood events. It says there were 200 angels who swore an oath together to do a dastardly deed. And they even knew they would be punished for it. But they decided they would take these women, would mate with them, and produce their own hybrid children. That's the word Nephilim. And the word Nephilim is from the word Nephal. It means fallen ones. It means they were aberrations, they were hybrids, they were not normal. It also describes how people responded when they saw the Nephilim. They collapsed, they fell in their presence. It also describes the activity of the Nephilim. They fell on people. I mean, everything about them was fallen. They were aberrations. And they were the hybrid children of fallen angels and women. And that is the root of all mythology. Now, my specialty is Greek and ancient religion. And if you study the ancient religions around the world, whether it's Egyptian, Roman, Greek, Assyrian, doesn't matter what you study, it all goes back to the same bare bones that there were Anunnaki, or there were gods that came out of the heavens, and they copulated with women, gave birth to demigods. You read that in Egyptian, Assyrian, Babylonian, Chaldean, Greek, Roman, all of them tell the same stories, almost the identical same stories. They may have different names for their gods, but they all talk about the same event, a pantheon of the gods that came down, and all of that is rooted in Genesis chapter 6. And after the flood, Noah and his boys begin to disseminate across what today is Turkey. And as they moved, they carried those stories with them. And eventually mankind came and settled in the area of the Euphrates, and they built the Tower of Babel. And that's when God scattered the languages and people began to move to different parts of the earth. And they carried those old stories when these angels came down and rebelled against God and gave birth to hybrid creatures. They carried those stories to the ends of the earth. And that's why everywhere in ancient religion, you have the same bare bones of this story. It can all go back to the Tower of Babel and to those who remembered those events. Those were not just legends. Maybe they became a little legendized, but they began with a real life event that is recorded in Genesis chapter 6. Now, the big question is, if the Nephilim were destroyed in the flood, then how in the world did they reappear after the flood?
Right.
And we can conjecture that there was a second incursion that took place again. And we can also conjecture that there's going to be another incursion at the end of the age. Because in Luke 21:11, Jesus said, as it was in the days of Noah, so it will be again in the days before the coming of the Son of Man. And Jesus gave these signs. He gave the regular signs: wars, rumors of wars, famines, pestilence. And then he added two things in Luke 21:11. He said there'll be great signs from the heavens and fearful sights. Well, in Greek, it uses the little preposition apo. And a better translation would be, there will be great signs coming down from the heavens. And Jesus is literally saying, at the very end of the age, you'll know you've sailed to the very end of time when people become obsessed with things coming down out of the heavens. And then he says, and fearful sights, and that is the Greek word phobotron. And the word phobotron is derived from phobos, the Greek word for fear. But when the word fear, phobos, becomes phobotron, it only has one meaning, just one. And Jesus knew that. It's the word for monsters. So if you're going to translate that verse correctly, Jesus said at the end of the age, things are going to begin coming down out of the heavens, and there's going to be the appearance of monsters at the end of the age. That, boy, we could really speculate as to what that means.
Yeah.
But it seems like there could be another incursion again, just as it was in the days of Noah, which means between now and the end of the age, Tony, it's going to get really nutty. We think it's nutty now. Nutty has only begun.
You're scaring me now.
We're going to see some really crazy things happen. But hey, we're chosen for this.
Yeah.
Other people prophesied about it, and we're walking it out.
Yeah.
We're getting to see all these things.
I'll tell you, I often think about these things and what it would look like, and the idea of, Nephilim. Like when I say the word Nephilim in today's world, what would that even look like? And you saying that reminded me I think it was one of the at least earliest times that I had come across your work, and I don't remember who you were talking to, but it was on YouTube. And I remember you hearing you talk for about a 20-minute video about phobotron. And it was the first time I ever heard it. And I probably listened to that video a dozen times straight, because I'm like, wait a second, hold on a second. I've never heard somebody talk about it before. I've heard people talk about, the idea of Nephilim coming back and from Luke 21. But I've never heard somebody break down the Greek word phobotron and how that plays out. Now, like you said, there's conjecture with a lot of this stuff on how it could play out, but we see Hollywood movies and monsters and things like that, and my mind on default jumps to that, but could there be a representation of monstrous sights as like AI, things that maybe Elon Musk is doing with, Neuralink and enhancing people's, or quote unquote, enhancing people's genetics and things like that. Do you think that could be something?
That could be a part of it. In fact, if you think about the days before the flood, it was a time of transgression. The word transgression, you hear that word trans? The word trans means to cross a border or a barrier that you're not supposed to cross. That's what a transgression is. It's different than a sin. A sin can be accidental, but a transgression, it is deliberately crossing a boundary. And that's what the angels did. And the result was monstrous things. So here we are now at the end of the age. And what's the big word that has reemerged? Trans. Here, it's a repeat. And what are people doing? Transmutation, transgender, transhumanism. We are crossing boundaries that we were never supposed to cross. And in laboratories across the world where eyes are not watching, they're doing all kinds of violations of science that should never be violated. They're already full swing in all of this. And I don't want to offend any of your listeners. And this is not a fashion statement. But in a certain way, if you go walking through the mall today, or if you go walking through the airport and just look around you, you kind of feel like you're surrounded in a world of monsters already. I mean, we're seeing people doing monstrous things to themselves. You don't know whether you're looking at a man or if you're looking at a woman. I checked into a hotel the other day. And there was a man with a big beard, long hair, full breasts, wearing a skirt, and he was the one checking us into the hotel. It is just so shocking, and it is monstrous. Then you add to that AI, and you add to that transhumanism, where people are waiting for singularity when humans and machinery and computer technology hook up together and we now become transhumans. This is not the stuff of science fiction. This stuff is already in the works. Neuralink. And you know what, Tony, it all starts with a good idea. To help somebody regain their eyesight by giving them some kind of technology. To help somebody who lost their arm to have an artificial arm that really works. That's all wonderful. But it goes from there to this other place. And that's where they are headed. That's called singularity. And it is going to be absolutely monstrous. I was just on an airplane. I watched a program about AI. And the person who was being interviewed is one of the main engineers for AI on the planet today. This person was visibly shaken by what she was saying about AI. She said, it is so strong. It is growing so fast. The challenge is, will we be able to control this? Because technology and computers, it's all learning. It's becoming its own thinking thing. She was visibly shaken. I was so glad I saw that interview, because that also is something monstrous which could happen at the end of the age. We're there.
Yeah.
We're there right now.
You're speaking about AI and the advancements of it. What do you think about the idea of AI and being used as a tool for entities to house themselves in? We hear people talk about how in Book of Enoch it talks about how the dead Nephilim become these demonic entities. I want to preface with saying that I personally believe the Book of Enoch is not in the Bible for a reason. I don't think that it should be part of the canon, but I also know that the writers of the scripture did read Enoch, so I view it as almost like we view commentaries. It's an aid.
And that's exactly how you should view it.
Good, because that's how I. So with that, I wonder. We see throughout history people experiencing demonic possessions, the flesh becoming possessed by a demonic entity or multiple, right? Thousands. Right. Could this be a step in that direction where people, instead of, not that they're going to give up on people, but I mean, imagine the damage that could be done if these entities could actually possess AI itself and use that as their engine. Do you think that's a possibility?
I don't know, but that's a very interesting thought. There's so many things we can speculate about. Or how about CERN, where they're trying to open portals? But you know what? We're opening portals without CERN. As lawlessness gets worse, portals are opening and things are showing up. People are not completely deranged that say they're seeing things. People are seeing things. That many people cannot be deranged. Some people are really seeing things. And now we know that even the Senate and the Congress is giving reports and investigations about these unidentified flying objects and UAP. The people are taking this serious. This is no longer the stuff of people that are just imaginary. And portals are opening and bad things are coming through those portals. It may be that these UFOs people are saying they're not extraterrestrial. They may be interdimensional things. And so, we're living in an interesting time.
Yeah, you mentioned a bit.
The Book of the Giants says that the spirits of the Nephilim became demons. Now, I don't know that, but it says specifically that just like the Nephilim were possessed with a desire to devour and to kill other human beings and to kill creation, to kill animals, when the Nephilim died, the Book of the Giants says their spirits never ceased, and their spirits are roaming the earth. And now those spirits torment people. Well, kind of makes sense to me. And so I believe that a lot of demonic activity is thousands of years old. It goes way, 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 way back. And who knows what we're going to see between now and the end.
Yeah. the things that we're seeing right now and being discussed, like you mentioned about the hearings and the idea of UFOs, ET being more interdimensional, and that being discussed. I feel like we are in a place where people are starting to see this, and it's almost, and I feel like it's reshaping even within the church, the way we operate. And I feel like, and maybe you have more of a gauge on this, being that where you lived for the last 30 plus years, but I do feel like in the Western Christian culture and church, the idea of the supernatural has been so suppressed that this is all wild, bizarre stuff that shouldn't exist, and you're just crazy for thinking it. When in reality, from my perspective, I feel like we're spiritual beings living a physical existence because of what happened in Genesis, and the supernatural aspect in our roots of our creation has been so mitigated to be just viewed as natural. It's just normal. There is nothing supernatural about this, that I feel like people are starting to come to a rude awakening with all this. I mean, do you feel that is a pattern that's starting to move forward, where within the Christian culture, people are starting to realize how supernatural our existence really is?
Yeah, I think people are realizing it. And I think that Hollywood is prophesying. Hollywood, it creates a lot of evil stuff. But I believe that Hollywood very often is a voice piece for the spirit world. And a lot of what they create that people go to pay money to see, they're really describing real entities, real realities. And honestly, Tony, right now, this room that I'm in, the room that you're in, it's filled with angels. We know that because in Peter it says that anytime the Bible is discussed, the angels come to listen. There are 10,000s and 10,000s of angels. We can't see them with our eyes right now, but they are here. So why would it surprise us if occasionally we would see one? Or why would it surprise us if occasionally somebody would see something of a dark dimension? These things are here. And we as believers in this day and age, we need to know how to deal with them. And this leads us to the subject of spiritual warfare. It is no longer an option. The devil is real. The demonic realm is real. And we're told in Ephesians 6:12 that our wrestle's not against flesh and blood, but it's against principalities, powers, rulers of the darkness, spiritual wickedness in high places. And by the way, the word high places in Greek, that phrase in Greek really describes the lower atmosphere where we live, which means these spirits have been dispatched into the human environment to affect people, to negatively victimize people. And we are anointed. We're gifted by God. We've got the power of the Holy Spirit. We've got the blood of Jesus. We've got the promises of God's word. We've got everything we need to drive evil out of our space and to set other people free. People really need us right now more than ever before. This is our moment. We were born for this, and we're really needed right now.
Absolutely. I don't know how I can move past that. So I think we're going to bring this in for a landing, because that's great advice and wisdom and perspective for the audience to understand that we essentially were made for this moment. It's not an accident that we are here today, as we are unique. Everybody listening right now, you are a unique individual that was created for a moment like this. And if you can step into that, I think you're going to see miraculous signs and wonders, and you're going to see God use you in ways you could never even imagine. Right now, you might be listening and saying, I don't believe in God. You've offended me a million times during this conversation. I don't even know why I'm listening. The reason why you're still listening is because it's been designed for you to listen to the end. And I just want to let everybody know right now, this world right now is changing. Some of it's for good, a lot of it's for bad, and it's not a mistake that you're here for this moment. So ponder that, think about it, and yeah, Mr. Renner, I appreciate you coming on the show and sharing all this stuff.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. It's been a blessing.
It's kind of simple, but it's not. We try a million paths, we're lost. Accolades without the cost. Fighting, justifying. I'm exhausted. Looking for everything everything in the shadows. Start looking at people like they don't matter. I'm waking up to the fact, more than a little bit shallow.